One of the quickest and most expedient ways to unite people that are not particularly naturally united is to unite them against somebody or something. In other words, a scapegoat is a very useful thing in which to unite a group of disparate people. It's very useful as well to someone who is trying to catch attention or who is trying to gain power. If you consistently attack an identifiable group, then you get noticed. If you consistently attack an identifiable group and ask them to vote for you, you may end up with a constituency, even if you don't have any coherent platform to offer. You'll notice that a lot of European politicians, or Western, I shouldn't even say European, Western politicians have started to do this, and we know what their target is. It's Islam, immigration, whatever. Now, due to the history of the Western world, and Europe in particular, the type of scapegoating that has historically been used has had to reinvent itself. Originally, when Western civilization was becoming essentially Western humanist civilization, the scapegoat, if you were a Catholic, was the Protestants. The scapegoat, if you were the Protestants, was, of course, the Catholics. Or the Catholic rulers, the Habsburgs, the Bourbons in France, the large monarchies, the empires. Or if you were a Catholic and you represented the large monarchies and empires, you were scapegoating the heretics, the Calvinists or the Lutherans or the Anabaptists. But the problem with that was, it created, this kind of sectarianism created so many absolutely atrocious wars. The 30 Years' War is one that I think anyone who wants to know about the history of sectarianism in Western civilization should know a lot about. It was essentially the Bosnian Civil War over the entire face of Central and Northern Europe for 30 years, i.e. atrocity upon atrocity upon atrocity, population versus population, and the worst elements in society coming to the very top. That horrified Europe. And they eventually, the 30 Years' War created, and the religious wars that sprang from that, or were related to it, created in Europe a horror of religious sectarianism. You don't see much of that anymore in Europe, except for in isolated places like Northern Ireland or southeastern Europe, where it's still there, but it's still very much it's now very much on the periphery. But sneaky politicians, starting, say, in the mid-19th century, wanted to use this scapegoating to have an identifiable group to unite people against, but they knew that they couldn't really use sectarianism or Christian religious sectarianism anymore, because people had realized just what a horrific thing that was. So they settled upon racism. So the early ethnic nationalists, and culminating with the Nazis, could say, listen, we know that no one wants to go back to the horrible old days of Catholic versus Protestant, or Anabaptist versus Lutheran, or Calvinist versus Catholic, because those wars just went on forever. Horrible things happened, and we know how people have no intention of ever going back to that. So what we're doing is, we're not saying that we're opposed to any particular Christian philosophy. We're going to unite everybody against an enemy, which is not religious, which is racial. Thus, philosophies like Nordicism, where you're uniting the Nordic, Germanic, Celtic races, allegedly, against everybody else, against the diluted Southern European types like the Spaniards and the Italians, perhaps even the French or the Greeks, against the black people, and of course the Semites. So it was kind of an end run where you couldn't get away with being sectarian anymore, but they were saying, listen, sectarianism is absolute anathema, and we know where that leads. It's an absolutely ghastly philosophy. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up with something a lot less horrible, a little bit more palatable to our society: racism. Yes, racism was introduced as a less dangerous and more scientifically acceptable form of scapegoating, sectarianism, where you couldn't really say that they were just against somebody for what they believed. You would say that, no, I'm against this person for scientific reasons. Now, this, of course, culminated in the Third Reich. Before people grasped that it could be just as deadly, just as horrific as the religious sectarianism of the 17th, 16th, 18th even centuries, before they could grasp that it could actually be that bad, well, the Holocaust, the Third Reich, and the Second World War had happened. And people got a horrible taste of what racism could be. And pieces of it survived afterwards in South Africa and in the deep south of the United States. Now, what we're seeing is an interesting fusion of sectarianism and racism, where the modern equivalent of this kind of scapegoating, this kind of societal scapegoating for political ends or for career-driven ends, as in the case of guys like Pat Condell and other high-profile Islamophobes, they've got kind of this two-headed monster, and they can emphasize whichever head that they want depending on how they're being criticized. They've got the best of both worlds because they're attacking essentially a religion, a particular religion, but not in the name of any other religion, i.e. atheism. So they can't say that I'm just saying that my type of religion, my mythology is better than your mythology, my religious leaders and religious figures and religious heroes and saviors and messiahs and everything, prophets are better than yours. No, you say that the whole thing is garbage. And now this actually forgets the fact that religion is pretty much on its way out in Western civilization anyway. And you just happen to be attacking Islam as one of many religions. So you're not really you're not singling out Islam when actually, in effect, that's what's happening. And the adherents of Islam just happen to be, at least the ones in your midst, immigrants, the descendants of immigrants, and people who just happen not to belong to the dominant race. So, if you want to be a racist, you disguise it now as militant atheism, which becomes actually, if you ask me, and if we're not careful, a new type of sectarianism, which could lead to the Third Reich or a repeat of the 30 Years' War. We still don't seem to have learned the lessons of those sorts of things. If someone attacks you for being a racist, you say, no, I'm a militant atheist. If someone attacks you for being too much of a sectarian, you say, no, I'm just attacking barbarous practices, really, like female genital mutilation, and all kinds of practices which you allege this other faith happens to be promoting. So it's a new, slippery kind of scapegoating which is taking place, and the people who are opposed to it can't quite get their ducks in a row yet as to how to actually quantify that kind of philosophy. I think that people are starting to catch on to what's happening, and they're starting to understand the dynamics and how to counter them. How to counter these sorts of new movements, but it's not happening quickly enough to get a lot of people, or to prevent a lot of people from getting scared, disgusted, and otherwise worked up. I'm just adding my voice to the chorus, or the growing chorus, I hope, of those who are opposing the new sectarianism, the new racism. Thank you.